Hi and welcome to the running channel. I'm Andy and today I'm going to be giving you a first look at Garmin's brand new Forerunner 255 and Forerunner 955 GPS watches. Now this isn't an in-depth review, but I have been lucky enough to be hands-on with both these watches down at Garmin's HQ in the UK. I'm going to whiz you through all of the new features, tell you how they fit into Garmin's range, and then hopefully give you a little summary at the end as well. So starting with the 255, so this watch fits into the Garmin range as one above the 55, which is their entry-level watch, one below the 745, which is the last one as yet to be updated to that 55 number, and then the 955 as the top of the range. The first thing you might notice about the 255 is this is quite a small version. So this is the 255S, or in fact the 255S Music. So the 255 comes in two different sizes. The S designates small, so the smaller version, which is a 41mm case, and the larger version is 46mm, which is more similar to the other watches in the Forerunner range. Both sizes are available in music and non-music. That affects the price, but the size doesn't, so both sizes are the same price. There are new colorways too, so there's a really nice grey that I've seen in the 255, which is worth checking out. I've got the white version here, and there's some others to look at as well. So let's dive into the features and take a look at what's new and what's different. So first up, I'm going to talk about what Garmin calls glances. So I've been using that feature for a while on my Fenix 7. Basically, it's a way of scrolling through lots of data screens in one go and seeing at a glance exactly the kind of the headline figures, as it were. And then you can choose by pressing the button to go into that menu to then look in more detail at your recent heart rate or training status, for example. There's also the update to Garmin's multi-band GNSS, which was introduced in the Fenix and the Epix watches. And that basically gives you more accurate GPS and more accurate tracking by eliminating interference from buildings and trees and so on. So that should give you a much more accurate GPS track that you look at in terms of the route that you've taken, but also on the spot live pace should also be much more accurate too. Sarah has been using the Epix, which has that multi-band GNSS feature, and looking at her track workouts, the accuracy is really improved on previous watches that we've tested, where you can see her running perfectly around the track rather than kind of jumping around a little bit. Battery life, there are 14 days in smartwatch mode or 30 hours in GPS mode. Both of those are significant improvements over the 245, which is this watch's predecessor. There's an update to suggested workouts. If you don't know what that is, Sarah did a video where she followed her watch. She only did what her watch told her to do for 30 days. Check that out on YouTube, which will give you a really good background on suggested workouts. But ultimately, it's your watch saying, based on what you've done previously or your current level of fitness, here's what the watch thinks you should do today. Now, there's a big improvement to this feature in the 255. The first part of that improvement is that you can now see 7 days ahead of suggested workouts rather than just seeing the one day of the watch thinking you should do this particular workouts, whether that's intervals, tempos, or a base run. The next part of the improvement is what Garmin are calling race widget. And this I think is really cool. So essentially you can enter in the date and distance of an event that you're planning to train for, and the watch will then coach you, essentially providing suggested workouts to allow you to improve enough to get to that race goal. You can even upload, I think, the GPX file of the race that you're planning on attempting. So that's a big difference to just getting a suggested workout one day at a time. You also get something called morning report. So if your watch is paired with your phone, then your phone can send details like weather and so on. So when you wake up in the morning, you get a snapshot of things like the weather, as well as information about your last night's sleep and something called heart rate variability status. And you can choose what's displayed by customizing that view. So that heart rate variability status is a new addition. Essentially that measures the time between heartbeats, or the variability in the time between your heartbeats, which is a really good measure of your fitness or potentially whether you're overtraining or overreaching. In fact, it's the opposite of what you might think. So a higher heart rate variability, so more variation in the time between your adjacent heartbeats, is actually a better thing and means you're more likely to be well rested. Whereas a lower figure compared to your kind of normal for heart rate variability might actually mean that you're starting to overtrain or might be a little bit under the weather. Totally different, but Garmin Pay has also now come to the 255. Bear in mind that Garmin Pay doesn't always support all major credit cards, but there is a way around that using something like Curve Card, something that's totally unaffiliated with Garmin, but might be worth looking into if you want to use contactless payment on your watch when you don't have your wallet or your phone with you. You get on-screen guided strength workouts on the 255 and something that Garmin are referring to as native running power. So I think previously, if you're using a Forerunner watch, you had to go through Garmin's IQ Connect store in order to download a third-party software onto the watch in order to support something that measured running power. But now if you have something like the Garmin Running Pod, the Dynamics Running Pod, or the HRM Pro heart rate band, which provides running dynamics data, then you can have live power natively displayed on your watch if you want to run to that. In fact, Manny and I raced a 10K head-to-head wearing the HRM Pro, looking at all of our various running dynamics data. So if you want to see a bit more of a deep dive into that and get a feel for what that might give you, do check out that video too. There's another addition called Health Snapshot. You actually have to sit still for this, so it takes about 2 minutes, and you can do it fairly regularly to see how your health changes. That uses pulse ox measurement as well as things like heart rate to take a look at your stress levels and so on in that moment. It also gives you more detail regarding training status. So training status is a measure that you can see on the watch of whether you've done the right amount of training in the right zone, so anaerobic and aerobic, for example, and it will designate it as things like productive if you're training in the right direction. So there's now a new designation of training status, which is called strained, which should help provide a more complete kind of picture of your training. There's an option for music or non-music, and that affects the price. The non-music version is slightly cheaper, and both versions have navigation, but only via breadcrumbs, so you don't get dedicated maps on the watch or turn by turn. You have to kind of work out where you are relative to yourself as opposed to relative to a map on the screen. And then finally, there's full triathlon support. So now during a race or a brick workout, you can toggle between activity types with one push of a button. So that's a whirlwind tour of the 255. Now to take a look at the 955. So the Forerunner 955 is Garmin's flagship running watch, the most expensive, the top of the range, and it basically includes all features that they could possibly throw at you. And it's aimed squarely at runners or triathletes who want access to everything and all the data that Garmin possibly has. So it has an almost identical feature set to the Phoenix outdoor watch, but it's much lighter because it's a running specific watch and doesn't need that kind of rugged outdoor aesthetic. That impacts the battery life a tiny bit, I'll come on to that in a minute, but not by a massive amount. And in fact, the biggest update to the Forerunner series here with the 955 is the fact that you can get a solar version. So there's just around the inside of the bezel and the screen itself, there's a special screen that can harvest the energy from sunlight and ultimately provide extra battery life. Battery life is impressive, and ultimately that's a big step up here from the 255 to the 955, especially with the addition of solar. And the quoted figures are 20 days for smartwatch mode, and then 49 hours in GPS mode. So if you are taking on really long ultra events, then that's going to be the big difference between this and the 255. Although I will say that those quoted figures, the 20 days, I think relies on around 3 hours a day of exposure to sunlight or daylight. And then similarly, the 49 hours GPS use also assumes that the watch is being exposed to daylight during that time. There's music, and just like the Phoenix, there's full on-watch mapping, including turn-by-turn navigation. And if you haven't ever used Garmin's mapping before, actually we've got a video where Anna tries that out, allowing her to upload new routes in a place she's never been before, straight to her watch, and then go out and explore without worrying about getting lost. And that is a really powerful tool that I've actually used quite a lot myself. Garmin have also added in the touchscreen, just like on the Phoenix, and it works in the same way. So you can disable it during activities in case you're worried about kind of scrolling by mistake. Similarly, you can use the buttons or the touchscreen to navigate all of the menus. And actually where it comes in most handy is probably using those maps. So actually scrolling around, seeing where you're going next, being able to zoom in and out. That's a really good feature too. There's also a new up ahead feature, and that allows you to pre-program waypoints, and then the watch will warn you about what's coming up, whether that's a water station, a hill, a checkpoint, or anything else that you might want to choose. And then at a glance, you can see exactly how far you've got and where those things are coming up. Another feature that you get on the 955 that you don't get on the 255 is called training readiness, which is how ready your body is to deal or benefit from training by taking into account sleep, recovery time, heart rate variability status, and additional metrics. And you get one of the best new features in addition to that, I think, that came to the Phoenix recently, and that's something called stamina, which ultimately shows you live on your watch how much longer you'll be able to perform at your current level. So if you're starting off at 100% of potential stamina, if you go off too fast, too soon, then your actual stamina will decline really quickly away from that kind of potential stamina line. And it will give you a time or a distance as to how much further or longer you can go at your current pace, allowing you to potentially back off and maximize your performance. And then finally, in addition to all of those new features, you get all of the amazing features that I already talked about for the 255. So things like morning report, heart rate variability status, multi-band GNSS for GPS accuracy, a race widget with the suggested workouts and the 7-day plan, and native running power. So if you're looking for a watch that can do almost everything that you'll need, including play music, then the 255 is a great option. You probably also want to compare it to Corus's Pace 2 and maybe even Polar's Pacer, their new watch, in this kind of price point. But if you need extra battery life, want to navigate maps directly on your watch, and you think you can make use of all of the extra features that Garmin throw into the 955, including things like stamina, and you don't need the rugged aesthetic of the Phoenix, which ultimately adds weight, then the 955 is a really accomplished watch. And then you might also be comparing that one to Coros Apex Pro, or maybe even the Polar Vantage V2 at that similar price point, although both of those watches are slightly cheaper. Definitely worth a look. Hopefully that's covered everything you could possibly want to know about these new watches from Garmin. If you've got any questions that I didn't cover, please pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. I'll see you next time on the Running Channel.